Hey everyone, I need to share something wild that went down at what was supposed to be our 30th wedding anniversary bash. A night I thought I'd remember forever, but not for the reasons you might expect. So, there I was, standing in our beautifully decorated backyard. A soft glow of string lights and the murmur of about 100 guests mingling in the cool evening air. The stage was set. Diana, my wife of 30 years, was by my side, laughing at a joke one of our closest friends had just cracked. Everything seemed picture-perfect, or so I let everyone believe. Deep down, though, I'd been harboring a secret that was going to shatter every illusion of that perfect night. As the chatter died down, I grabbed the mic with a confidence I didn't quite feel. I started by thanking everyone for coming and reminiscing about the countless memories we'd built over the years. Then, in a tone that was as calm as it was shocking, I announced, "I'd like to officially declare that Diana and I have been separated for the past 10 months. The moment the words left my lips, the air shifted. I could see the shock ripple across the faces in the crowd, especially Diana's. Her eyes widened in disbelief as if she were caught mid-sentence, ready to defend our marriage, but I'd anticipated that reaction. I had planned every detail, every word, down to the final punctuation. The room was thick with tension. A mix of gasps, murmurs, and stunned silence fell over everyone. Diana tried to interject, her voice trembling as she attempted to mend the situation, to remind everyone of the love we once shared. But I wasn't swayed. I'd prepared a long time for this moment, meticulously orchestrating the perfect blend of honesty, shock, and inevitability. Now, I know this might sound cold, even cruel, but let me give you a bit of context. By that time, our marriage had already been on a collision course for months. I wasn't making a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a reality I'd been living with quietly, away from the prying eyes of family and friends. And tonight, I finally had the stage, the audience, and the resolution to declare that what once was had irrevocably ended. The irony wasn't lost on me. Celebrating 30 years of marriage while marking the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was free, even if that freedom came at a high emotional cost. For those who've been following along, this was only the opening act of a much larger drama. Stay tuned. There's a lot more to unpack from that fateful night, and trust me, things were just getting started. I could see the shock in Diana's eyes as I took the stage, but there was no turning back now. I wasn't going to let her spin a narrative of victimhood or feign innocence. I held up my phone like a gavel, my voice steady as I declared, "This isn't a wedding anniversary celebration, it's a divorce party." The words hung heavy in the charged atmosphere of our backyard, leaving the guests frozen between disbelief and morbid fascination. I could hear the murmurs ripple through the crowd. Some guests looked like they were trying to process the fact that everything we'd celebrated for 3 decades was nothing more than an elaborate lie. Others wore expressions that mixed shock with a certain dark satisfaction, almost as if they were watching a carefully choreographed play unfold. For me, this was not a moment of impulsive rage, but the culmination of a long, painful truth I'd been forced to confront. And then I pressed play. The recorded phone call filled the air, every word punctuating the finality of our crumbling marriage. There she was, on the other end of the line, whispering the name of her lover with a tenderness that cut like a knife. I had spent months gathering evidence, meticulously recording every conversation that confirmed her betrayal. The clarity of her affection for someone else, so raw and intimate, was undeniable. It was a declaration of love that had been hidden in plain sight, and I laid it bare before everyone. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few stifled chuckles broke the tension. Some guests appeared visibly disturbed, their faces etched with sympathy for a woman they thought they knew. Others seemed oddly relieved, as if the spectacle validated a secret suspicion that had been gnawing at them for years. And then there were those who simply looked on, unsure of what to make of the dramatic unfolding of events. In that moment, I wasn't just Mike from a crumbling marriage. I was the orchestrator of my own truth, standing in the center of a storm that I'd summoned with precision. As the recording ended, the room was left in a state of suspended disbelief. Diana's attempts to interject were drowned out by the collective shock of our guests. I knew that in revealing this hidden chapter, I had changed everything, and there was no going back. This wasn't just the start of the end for our marriage. It was the beginning of a much larger, more complicated saga. I could already sense that the fallout from tonight's revelations would echo far beyond the walls of our once happy home. And as I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, I wondered how many of them would ever see the real story behind the facade. Stay tuned. This tale was about to take another unexpected turn. As the atmosphere in our backyard thickened with tension, Diana's face went through a series of rapid, panicked expressions. I could see that she was scrambling for words, desperately trying to justify herself. "Mike, she began, but I wasn't having it." I leaned in, my voice cold and methodical. "Oh, you've got a lot to explain, Diana." I took a deep breath, knowing that the next revelations would hit harder than anything we'd already shared tonight. "Let's talk about the money, shall we?" I said, and the crowd hushed, sensing that the drama was far from over. I revealed the first piece of damning evidence. Over the past several months, I had discovered that you, Diana, had been secretly renting hotel rooms. Rooms that cost a staggering $700 a night. Every time you booked one, I was left in the dark, thinking it was just a random getaway or some harmless splurge. But not tonight. I explained to everyone how I'd pieced together your lavish escapades, noticing strange charges and odd bank statements that I couldn't ignore. And that wasn't all. I then dropped the bombshell that left even the most skeptical guests in stunned silence. I disclosed how you had been using my own credit card to buy extravagant gifts. Gifts that were never meant for me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial, and it stung all the more because it wasn't just a matter of trust, but also my hard-earned money being squandered behind my back. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, I produced the final piece of undeniable proof. A second phone. Hidden away, buried among your personal belongings. This wasn't just a backup. It was a lifeline to your secret double life. The evidence spoke for itself. I couldn't help but mention the most surreal and painful moment of all. I recalled the day you came home wearing someone else's wedding ring. A ring that wasn't mine. It wasn't just a symbol of infidelity. It was the ultimate betrayal, a final, glaring reminder that you had truly moved on. The room was silent. The air, once filled with murmurs and uncertainty, now pulsed with the weight of my revelations. Every word was like a punch, and there was no denying that the truth had finally come crashing down. This wasn't merely a personal vendetta. It was the culmination of betrayal in every conceivable way, and the evidence I presented left no room for doubt. The tension in the air hit a fever pitch. As I wrapped up my latest damning revelation, Diana's shock turned to rage. In a split second, she lunged at me, her hand raised as if to strike. But before she could connect, a few of our guests rushed forward, restraining her. The betrayal had become too public, too raw. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room, once warm and familiar, now filled with a mix of pity, disbelief, and even amusement. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Some faces contorted into sneers, openly mocking the chaos that had upended our once sacred gathering. Then came the sound of frantic footsteps. Ryan, her secret lover, had been lurking in the background, watching this calamity unfold. Now, caught in the midst of his own treachery, he bolted, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. In a desperate, almost instinctual act, Diana bolted after him, her arms outstretched, chasing a ghost of her own making. And as if the spectacle wasn't dramatic enough, the tide of support that had once rallied to her defense evaporated in an instant. Friends who had always covered for her missteps were now clutching their coats, whispering hurried apologies as they made a beeline for the exit. It wasn't just our marriage that was in ruins anymore. It was her entire reputation, crumbling before the eyes of everyone who once believed in her. Standing there in the middle of the unfolding disaster, I felt an unexpected mix of vindication and sorrow. This wasn't a simple divorce. It was a total collapse of the world we'd both built, piece by piece, right before the public's eyes. And as I surveyed the chaotic scene, a shattered life in slow motion, I knew there was no turning back. I came home later that night expecting silence. A cold, heavy calm to match the chaos of the evening. Instead, I was greeted by the sound of shattering glass, splintering wood, and Diana's furious, anguished cries echoing through our once peaceful home. Every step I took toward the living room revealed more of the devastation. Picture frames lay askew, treasured mementos broken, and furniture overturned in a desperate, violent outburst. It was as if she had tried to tear down every symbol of the life we had built together. I paused at the threshold, momentarily transfixed by the scene of ruin. The air reeked of spilled wine and a bitter cocktail of emotions. A mix of anger, despair, and raw grief. In the center of it all, Diana was a whirlwind of fury. She paced back and forth like a caged animal, her eyes blazing with tears that quickly transformed into streams of uncontrolled rage. With each crash of her hands against a piece of shattered decor, she screamed, "You ruined my life! You ruined everything!" The words reverberated around the empty spaces of our once happy home. For a moment, I felt a pang of something I'd long since buried: regret, sorrow, the ghost of our shared memories. But that feeling was fleeting, swallowed by the reality that had unfolded over the past few months and the dramatic unraveling at the party. I knew that the final act of our disintegration was unfolding before me, and I was ready to deliver the closing blow. I walked calmly toward the desk where I had laid out the divorce papers. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. It was as if the shattered fragments of our past had taken their own vow of silence. With deliberate precision, I picked up the thick envelope containing every legal detail of our separation. The terms that would dismantle every shared asset, every financial tie, every lingering hope of reconciliation. "No alimony," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "No joint assets. It's all laid out in black and white." Diana's reaction was immediate and explosive. She spun around, her eyes wild with disbelief, and let out another anguished cry. "This isn't fair. How can you do this to me?" Her voice cracked as she alternated between furious accusations and desperate pleas. But every word she uttered, every tear that streaked her face, only reinforced the finality of what had been decided. I had long ago made up my mind. There was no returning to the way things had been. I sat down on the edge of our once shared couch, watching her as she moved like a shadow in the wreckage of our life together. Her tears, now freely streaming down her face, were a silent testament to the heartbreak that had been building up inside her for months. Yet I found myself numb, unresponsive to the suffering she was displaying. The person who had once shared my dreams, who had once been my confidant and my partner, was now just a stranger trapped in a moment of overwhelming despair. The divorce papers lay open on the coffee table, a symbol of our definitive end. I could see the cold legal language that left no room for negotiation, no hint of compromise. It was a stark reminder that all our years together, our laughter, our shared milestones, our quiet moments of understanding, were now reduced to a ledger of debts and assets, balanced in favor of one final outcome. I was done. "Diana," I said softly, as if trying to reach through the chaos to the person I once knew. "This is the end. I've made my decision. I'm not here to negotiate your feelings or your pain." My words, though simple, carried the weight of every unsaid apology, every moment of lost love. The sound of her sobs filled the space between us, a sorrowful counterpoint to the cold finality of the divorce papers. In that moment, I realized that the revenge I had meticulously planned was not just about retribution for every slight and betrayal. It was about reclaiming control, a final, irrevocable step toward a future where I was no longer defined by a relationship that had turned toxic. The living room, a place that once held our shared hopes and dreams, was now a battleground where every piece of evidence, every shattered artifact, testified to the truth of our downfall. I sat there, unmoved by the emotional wreckage before me, watching as the reality of our lives crumbled further with each passing second. The echoes of our past whispered in the ruins, a reminder of what had been lost. And though Diana's cries might have tugged at the remnants of my heart, I had long since resolved that there was nothing left to salvage. The divorce papers were not just a legal document. They were the embodiment of every truth I had fought to reveal, every betrayal I had endured. As the night deepened, so did the silence that followed her final, anguished sob. I knew that come morning, the full weight of our decisions would settle in. For now, I allowed the quiet to fill the space between us. A quiet as cold and final as the ink on the paper that sealed our fate. The doorbell rang again sometime after the tempest in our home had begun to settle into an uneasy silence. A silence that was filled only by the occasional creak of our damaged floorboards and the low hum of residual tension in the air. I wasn't expecting anyone at that hour, but when I opened the door, I found Ryan standing there. His expression was a bizarre cocktail of confusion, fear, and something akin to guilt. And in that moment, I knew there was another twist waiting to unravel. "Mike," he stammered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Before I could ask him what was wrong, he blurted out, "Diana, she's pregnant." For a split second, time seemed to freeze. I stared at him, my mind quickly piecing together the implications of his words. The revelation was not entirely unexpected. There had been murmurings, fragments of truth whispered in moments of weakness, and the unmistakable pattern of behavior I had witnessed over the past months. I'd known, deep down, that this wasn't a sudden development but the culmination of a long-planned series of betrayals and manipulations. "Pregnant," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the space between us like a dark omen. Ryan nodded hesitantly, his eyes clouded with uncertainty, as if he wasn't quite sure what he'd just set into motion. I sighed, stepping aside to let him in. The room, still bearing the scars of our earlier confrontation, suddenly felt even more oppressive. I motioned for him to take a seat, and after a few moments of awkward silence, I decided to break the tension. "Ryan, you need to understand something," I began, my tone steady and resolute. "You're just one of many in this twisted story of Diana's. I'm not surprised by your arrival. I've been expecting this news for a while now." He looked at me, his face contorting in a mix of disbelief and desperate hope. "But if she's pregnant, doesn't that change things? I mean, maybe I'm—" His words faltered as he realized I wasn't listening to his pleas. Instead, I continued, laying it all bare as if I were recounting a case study rather than my personal tragedy. "The fact is, I already knew about her schemes long before you ever got close," I said, the memories of evidence, secret recordings, and endless betrayals flooding back. "This isn't about love or fidelity anymore. It's about power, control, and, frankly, financial security. You see, Diana isn't expecting a child out of genuine emotion or a desire for a family. She's expecting you to be her lifeline. Since I've cut her off entirely, no alimony, no joint assets. You're the only one in her crosshairs now." Ryan's eyes widened as the truth dawned on him. He had hoped that perhaps, in the innocence of a new relationship, things might be different. Maybe he could be the savior in this shattered narrative. But I was clear. He was merely another pawn, unwittingly caught in the trap that Diana had meticulously set up. "I know it might sound cold, but this is exactly what she's after," I continued, my voice echoing in the hollow space of our ruined home. "A fallback option, a way to secure some semblance of financial stability when her chances of getting anything from me have completely evaporated." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him, ensuring he grasped the gravity of the situation. "You're not her partner in the traditional sense. You're just a temporary solution, a safety net for her greed and desperation. And let me be perfectly clear. There's no guarantee that you're even the father of this child. It might be a cruel joke, or it might be another calculated move on her part to ensure she's never left in a vulnerable position." Ryan's face drained of color as the reality sank in. His dreams of being the one to rescue her, of creating a happy ending out of the chaos, were shattered in that moment. I could see the panic in his eyes, the same look I had once seen in Diana's when the consequences of her own actions began to spiral out of control. As I spoke, the room seemed to close in around us, each word amplifying the futility of his situation. "Diana has always been a master of manipulation," I continued, my tone void of sympathy. For years, she used charm, deceit, and every trick in the book to secure what she wanted. Whether it was affection, luxury, or financial gain. And now, with this pregnancy, she's doubled down on her plan. She's trying to ensure that she's never left with nothing, even if it means dragging another man into the mess. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Ryan looked away, his eyes filling with regret and a dawning realization of the trap he'd stepped into. I wasn't the man who'd relished in the spectacle of our public breakup, nor was I the one who had meticulously laid out the legal foundations of our divorce. But I was the one who now had to deal with the fallout of a plan that was far bigger than our shattered marriage. Think about it, I said softly, almost to myself. Diana's whole life has been a series of calculated moves. And now you're part of her next move, whether you like it or not. She expects you to be her financial crutch, her insurance policy. And once that's secured, you'll likely find yourself discarded, just another casualty in her endless pursuit of self-preservation. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. Ryan sat there, the realization of his role dawning upon him in painful clarity. I knew that, in many ways, this wasn't just about Diana or me. It was about the harsh reality of how some people manipulate the lives of others to fill the voids they've created within themselves. In that moment, as I watched Ryan grapple with the enormity of what lay ahead, I couldn't help but feel a mix of resignation and grim satisfaction. The trap had been set long ago, and now, one more soul had wandered into it, unaware of the bitter truth. And while I had once hoped that exposing Diana's duplicity would liberate me, I now realized that it had only deepened the scars on our lives, scars that no amount of legal fine print or bitter revelations could ever truly heal. By the time Ryan left, his face had drained of every trace of hope. I watched him stand there, the weight of realization finally crashing down on him as if a tidal wave had swept away all his pretenses. His eyes darted between mine and the stack of papers I had laid out on the coffee table, a stack that now held the damning proof of Diana's carefully orchestrated plan. I slid the marriage contract towards him, my fingers brushing the cool paper as if it were a talisman of my newfound freedom. Ryan picked it up slowly, his hands trembling. His eyes widened when he saw the clause he'd never noticed before, a stipulation that barred Diana from receiving any money after the divorce, unless she were pregnant. It was a clause that I had insisted on including, a safeguard against all her manipulations. In that moment, Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to stark terror. He realized that every move, every whispered promise from Diana, had been calculated. The pregnancy wasn't a miracle of love or destiny. It was a pre-planned strategy to secure her financial future at the expense of both of us. You see, I said, my voice quiet and resolute. She's always been 3 steps ahead. You were just another pawn in her game, a temporary solution to prop up her schemes. This clause here, it's the final move. It guarantees her a safety net if she ever manages to trigger that condition. And now that you've walked into her trap, you're left with nothing but the bitter truth. Ryan's eyes locked onto the clause, and I could see the panic rising within him. He tried to form words, but his voice was caught in the sudden swell of regret and despair. It was as if the realization of his own manipulation had shattered the illusion of control he had once clung to. Slowly, as the silence stretched on, his shoulders sagged in defeat. I took a deep breath, feeling the power of the moment course through me, a long-awaited sense of control finally reclaiming the life that had been wrenched from me. I'm sorry you had to learn this way, I murmured, though my tone was void of genuine remorse. There was no pity left in me for the man who had been so utterly ensnared by Diana's web. With a resigned shake of his head, Ryan mumbled a half-hearted goodbye and turned to leave. The door closed quietly behind him, marking the end of yet another chapter in this tangled saga of betrayal and control. I stood in the quiet aftermath, the lingering echoes of our confrontation resonating in the stillness of the room. Every piece of evidence, every calculated move had led to this moment, a moment where I had finally reclaimed what was rightfully mine. That same evening, as I attempted to settle into a semblance of calm, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Diana's name flash across it. A final twist in our already tumultuous story. With a cautious breath, I answered, half expecting another dramatic outburst. Instead, I was met with her voice, thick with despair and venom as she hissed, "You ruined my life." For a moment, I paused, listening to the familiar bitterness in her tone. A slow smile crept across my face. A smile that wasn't born of cruelty, but of the profound satisfaction of having reclaimed my own destiny. "No, Diana," I replied softly, my words measured and deliberate. "I just got mine back." In that exchange, every cruel twist, every calculated betrayal was laid bare. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about taking back control over a life that had been hijacked by lies and manipulation. The marriage contract with its damning clause wasn't just legal jargon. It was the key to my freedom. It ensured that, despite all the chaos and deception, I would no longer be bound by the remnants of a relationship that had long since decayed. As I ended the call, the finality of our conversation echoed in the quiet of my now peaceful living room. I realized that, sometimes, the most potent victories aren't achieved through grand gestures or public spectacles. They are found in the simple act of reclaiming what was lost. Tonight, I had taken back control over my life, piece by painful piece. And in doing so, I had secured a future where betrayal no longer dictated the terms. The night grew deeper, and as I looked out into the darkness, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. I had navigated through the wreckage of deceit, manipulated plots, and shattered illusions to arrive at this moment of pure, unadulterated control. And in that victory, I finally knew. This was not an act of spite, but a reclamation of everything I had once been, and everything I would become.